certainly something that's useful, especially if you're working in the IT sector. Many of you probably are in the IT sector who are attending this, because I know that Zoom is a fabulously popular product, and naturally it's a popular product because it's a good product, but it's certainly very popular in the IT sector. Visa requirements to get the blue card, which naturally comes with a whole host of advantages, which gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of travel after you've completed, or rather had the EU card for a couple of years at that point in time. You've got a university degree comparable to German standards, and I think if we look at it from that perspective, all of you who deal with global mobility, which includes the US, clearly we've got to provide evaluations that show that the foreign education or the non-German education is up to the same standards as the German education qualifications. Minimum salary goes up, 49,600 euros, clearly sometimes maybe a high bar to meet, but it's important. You need to have employment with for at least a period of 1 year to qualify for the blue card, and then you can work in Germany. Essentially, you can work in Germany anywhere once you've got the EU card, the EU blue card. If the occupation is a shortage occupation, I think we're all pretty aware of what a shortage occupation is. It's always a fact by fact, specific determination. Sometimes you may have a general or a generic list that allows and states what the shortage occupations may be. And if that happens, clearly it's an advantage, because if the individual fits into that shortage occupation, you're good to go and basically apply for the EU blue card. And the salary threshold actually at that point in time is 38,688 euros, which is certainly lower than 49,000. Plus you've got other costs that may also have an impact as well. Let's see, talking about the EU blue card, that's the one that allows you basically also to be leased to a third party. Again, many of you are aware from the US side about leasing employees to third parties. It's a huge issue which will be addressed in a different panel, but clearly we're all aware of that, and we realize that that's a weak spot. It doesn't matter whether it's in the US, whether it's in any other part of the world, that is a weak spot that has to be addressed very carefully. But this is of special value to the IT industry. That's what many of the largest IT companies survive on. That's what, if you want to call them staffing companies, they survive on that as well, because they, without being able to lease the employees and servicing the industry that wants that kind of staff, companies may have an issue with delivery of their products and services as well. In Germany, it's called labor lease. I think it doesn't matter what you call it and what it's referred to in different parts of the world. It's essentially the same concept. You're going to be leasing people, or you're going to be assigning people to different projects at your contract sites or your client sites. That's essentially what it comes down to. Once you've had the EU blue card for 2 years, you're kind of a free bird. You can then go work with any employer anywhere you want in Germany. You're not limited to working with that employer who helped get you the EU blue card. So that's, of course, an advantage, no question. Again, speaking of the IT sector, how many of you are from the IT sector, by the way? Okay, I'd have expected all hands to be up. I guess it's not. Okay. Okay, so visa qualifications, my apologies if we're focusing a little more on the IT sector than some of the other sectors. Software has to be individually programmed, again, cannot be off the shelf. Or again, those of you who are in the audience who are on the IT sector side are aware of the concept of L1B visas that we all deal with and we all struggle through and struggle with. We've got to really show that it's specific. It's not an off-the-shelf product. It's not something that's generic. You've got to be able to show that. So a generic product, such as an off-the-shelf product and installation, is not going to be allowed or encouraged in Germany. You can play with words. You can play with situations. You do need to be very careful about the facts, because if you're caught out on it, you could end up paying some pretty heavy penalties on that as well. It cannot be simply extending or upgrading the software or the software systems, and it cannot be for a standalone application. So it's got to be for a global perspective, a global system that you're also looking at as that. If you meet the criteria and their qualifying factors, then you can travel to Germany without necessarily meeting the traditional 1-year qualifying requirement. The 1-year qualifying requirement essentially means, because it's an ICT issue, you don't have to have been employed for 1 year prior to going to Germany with your foreign employer. So if you can get away from that, that's fantastic. I guess the last bullet actually is pretty critical, that it's often misused. To avoid penalties, all the mentioned criteria must be met. I think that is really important in India from our Indian perspective for a very simple reason. We are the largest IT providers in the world. Clearly, we are, I wouldn't use the word targeted, but we're certainly under scrutiny for a variety of reasons, because sometimes we play fast and loose, or at least that's the perception that the other countries and the companies and the governments may have. So it is important from your perspective to be really careful about this. And I bring that more to your attention because you folks, again, like I've said before, are the HR folks, you're the decision makers, you're the folks signing off on these applications, and I think it's for you to be able to at some point either justify it or face the music on that one. So you need to be careful about that. Compliance, we come back to a very familiar concept and a subject that hopefully is dear to all of us: compliance, 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 I guess. You've got to be really careful when you're traveling for business, you're traveling for work, you're traveling on holiday. Make sure that your employees are very clear about that and that you don't get those things confused at all. That's really important. If you misuse the Schengen visa, it's a criminal offense, can end up also having you blacklisted for a period of 5 years, which clearly you do not want to be responsible for, and you don't want to be walking up to your senior management and saying, I'm sorry, but we can't sponsor this visa for the next 5 years, or we're not able to do business in that country for the next 5 years. You really want to be careful about that. Information on salaries that's provided, again, this is something that's going to come up in later panels as well. You need to make sure it's correct. You need to make sure that you're informing the authorities if there are changes as per their rules and regulations. You need to make sure there's consistency in all the applications, and that the salary that you're paying can be confirmed against what you've said on the applications and petitions. You just really need to be very, very careful about that. We spend hours of discussions on salary-related issues, and of course other issues with our clients, but salary-related issues are probably of prime concern because clearly it affects the bottom line, it affects the gross revenue of the company, and you've got to be very careful, because I can tell you that at the end of the day, whether it's in the US, whether it's in a Schengen country, if there is an issue and the individual gets into trouble, I truly believe he or she is going to point to you guys as the HR folks. That's going to be the first finger pointing. That, well, they told me I could do this, and they said that I can do that, and we've seen that over and over again, whether it's at a port of entry, whether it's at the consulate level. The individual is not going to take the fall. Whether rightly or wrongly, you are going to take the fall. So I think it's really important from a compliance perspective to make sure that you are properly protected and the information is completely consistent with every application that you submit. Keep copies of the applications. I think that hardly needs to be said. I'm pretty sure that all of you who do that are doing the right thing. Zoom probably facilitates that for many of us in terms of making sure we have the correct information saved, that it's properly documented. That's really important. Also very important to remember, if your employee has been outside Germany for more than 180 days continuously, that work permit may become invalid. It may not be any good to you. So you do need to figure out when your employee is traveling as to whether you want them to travel, how long are they going to be traveling for. And we realize there are always exceptions. There are always situations that may be outside the employee's control. However, you do want to make sure that you're aware of it. And I think many of you would agree that as your business opportunities grow, as the locations increase in the United States or any other part of the world, you do tend, when I say you, I don't mean it personally, but one tends to lose control over entries and exits by employees. Where are they at any given point in time? Because if they're going for personal reasons, they're highly unlikely to be keeping you informed each time they go out and come back, whichever country they're in. So you do need to be aware of that as well. Switching to France, let's talk about their immigration updates. They've had several. They've had some recent ones as well. So far as less than a month ago, there was a decree which essentially enforces that a short-term work permit will no longer be required for following categories. Again, you've got to be careful about the categories as you use them and make sure that it is fact-specific and that you are going to be, that the individual clearly falls within that category. That's really important to remember. No question about that. Especially when you get into fairly broad-based categories such as film, audiovisual, entertainment and publishing, production, distribution. I think obviously a very large group of people can fall into that category, and you need to make sure and be careful that you are properly documenting how the individual qualified to fall within those parameters. Modeling, I think most of us know what that entails. I don't think that should be an issue. Education given occasionally by visiting professors. Again, you need to be careful. If they're on a tenure track, may have different considerations than somebody who's a summer or a visiting professor for summer months at whichever university that they may be. Employee on detachment. How many of you know what an employee on detachment means? I mean, I basically had to look that up. Okay, employee on detachment means an employee who's being paid by the home company on the home payroll. Okay, so that's an employee on detachment. I had to look that up. I didn't know what that concept was, but I think it's fairly simple once we explain what that means. And if they are being sent over there for a variety of different reasons, but very specific, again, so far as France is concerned, you've got assignment for audits, experts in IT, expertise. I think that's a word that can be defined in many, many different ways. You need to be very careful. Look and see what the historical definition has been of experts used in the concept of that country and in terms of their own products that they're referring to. Experts in IT, I think we're all experts in IT. And that doesn't make all of us experts. Obviously, I think I know how to use a laptop, and for my 3-year-old son, I could be an expert, but clearly I know I'm not. So you need to be very careful when you're defining terminology that's vague, because again, you want to be compliant, you want to protect yourself and make sure that you are doing what is right. Management, finance, insurance, architecture, engineering, I think we can all look at that, but again and again, I repeat, it's very fact-based and you need to be careful on that. Let's see, staying on with France, what's a talent passport? That's an interesting, again, it's a nice terminology, but I think it's very specific. It affects highly skilled, again, I think a term of art. What is highly skilled? Foreign nationals, one again has to be careful about that. If you get that, you've got a residence permit that's valid for 4 years, which is always a nice thing to have. Who falls into that category? Let's see, look at that. Once you've got that, people who are changing status from students, but they hold a master's degree from France. That's important to note over here. It's a master's degree from France. So for all of us who deal with the US and deal with other countries where there may be an issue or a standard of equivalency, there is no equivalency standard here. It has to be a French master's degree. Important to remember that. If they have a European blue card, then you've got the local employment contracts in France. Scientists, researchers, again, it's going to depend on each one's qualifications, and it's always going to be fact-based. Now, the next category is kind of interesting because they're holding a master's degree who wish to open a business in France. Where's that master's degree from? They seem to be leaving that open for a fact and a very specific definition, I think, at some point in time. It's possible that a master's degree from India in arts or commerce or science may not qualify as a master's degree for purposes of a French business opportunity. Whether it will or not, I think we would all need to find out based on what that master's degree is in. You should get an evaluation clearly to be able to present the best case possible if questioned, and I think that's really important. But the difference is obviously, like in the first bullet point, they said you need a master's degree from France. They're not saying that in that subsequent bullet point. So that leaves some room for maneuverability, but you want to be careful about that. Obviously, I suspect that many of you may not be dealing with that because that's probably going to be individuals who are dealing with that. Foreign nationals who present a project in innovation, again, it's more individual-based than corporate-based, so I'm not necessarily going to discuss that too much. Foreign nationals who invest directly in France, they have not yet defined what invest means in terms of specifics, whether in terms of amount or what they're going to be investing in. I think that's up for discussion, and I have a feeling like many other international immigration issues, it's going to get developed over a period of time. It's good to know that the talent passports will actually be processed at French consulates, and you're not necessarily dependent on the bureaucrats in France who may or may not take longer. As we've seen in the US visa context, some visas are better off processed as consulates, while some just have to be processed at the Immigration Service in the United States. You may not have that choice at all. Applications processed or filed prior to November 1 are going to be processed in the previous manner in terms of being grandfathered. They will be given those same considerations that they were given over this last period of time. Delays are to be expected until they issue new forms. And I think that's, again, a very common theme against or across the board when it comes to immigration in any country, essentially. You're going to be dealing with, you have something new, it's change, it's going to take a while before it gets implemented and it gets processed. Some immigration updates, again, continuing on that. ICT employee on detachment, now we all know what that means, issued for employment for employee whose assignment in a senior management position or to provide expertise to a company in France that's part of the same group. I am always intrigued when they define, in terms of what does that country or the immigration have in mind when they say senior. For those of us who are very familiar with the US system, again, senior may have different meanings. We have seen the Immigration Act sensibly at times and act little less sensibly at times, or in a more challenging manner, because they may be looking at the number of employees. They may be looking at the number of employees who are being supervised by you. They may be looking to see what is the salary the individual earns, what is the responsibility that individual has in terms of the foreign country concept. So you need to look at all of that. It's not enough to have a title. As again, many of you who process US visas would know, calling somebody senior is not going to fly if that senior executive or senior management is supervising people who are either non-professionals, meaning people who don't have a bachelor's degree, or people who are at somewhat less than professional levels. You're not first-level supervisors, for example, in a manufacturing facility. If you're supervising them, that's not going to be considered a senior management position. A lot of it comes down to what kind of decision-making authority do you have? What are you allowed to do? Who do you report to in turn? What is the income? What's the salary that you are making over there? All of that comes into play for deciding who or what is senior management. Trainees, ICT trainees are issued with an approved training agreement within the framework of the internship. Clearly, it